The discovery of the New World changed everything. Over the next 2 centuries, those anarchs who refused to accept the Convention of Thorns coalesced into the Sabbat and struck out against the Camarilla's power. The organization and superior numbers of the older sect, the Camarilla, gave it a distinct advantage. However, during the 17th century, the younger Sabbat vampires began migrating to the New World en masse, leaving most of Europe to the Camarilla. For a time, there was some debate as to whether to pursue the enemy to the Americas, but eventually the idea of staking out new territories was accepted as a means of placating younger kindred. Whereas it had seemed that the Sabbat might claim all of the New World, as their enemies fell into internal conflicts over dwindling resources, the Ivory Tower decided to consolidate power in the English, Dutch, and French colonies. The War of 1812 and the Napoleonic Wars mirrored a renewed battle for the Atlantic coast, where the Camarilla gradually lost city after city throughout the first half of the 19th century. As the war expanded to the American frontier, the Camarilla was barely able to hold on to its domains, only because of a civil war that broke out within the Sabbat's ranks. In the 20th century, the Camarilla was greatly weakened by internal disputes as kindred took differing sides in the mortal conflicts in Europe. This was especially true during the Second World War, when many elders, particularly among the Toreador, Tremere, and Ventrue, supported the Axis powers. The inner circle refused to take sides, and even individual Justicars ended up working against one another. However, when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, it became deadly apparent how important preserving the Masquerade and global peace was, for mortals now possessed the power to destroy both themselves and all kindred. Now we move into the modern day, the final nights. Following the Sabbat invasion of the East Coast, the Camarilla suffered another blow with the departure of the Gangrel clan. The reasons for their withdrawal are unknown. It is rumored that their Justicar Xavier went before the inner circle, uttered a single sentence, and left. Word spread throughout the clan, and over the course of a month or so, the majority of the clan abandoned the sect and became independent. Now I'm going to touch upon the Camarilla's culture very quickly. Alright, now we're going to be speaking about the Camarilla's culture. In general, much of the Camarilla's approach to maintaining order involves enforcing the traditions, which, among other things, means supporting a system of feudal domains and the responsibilities of sires for the conduct of their children. The latter idea is often taken further to mean the sire has complete authority over the child, and that elder vampires are intrinsically more deserving of respect and fit for leadership than younger vampires. Whatever the merits of that position may be, it has a tendency to instill great resentment among young kindred, and in the past has driven many to the Anarchs and sometimes even to the Sabbat. Older vampires naturally support the social order which they have mastered over the centuries, and in fact much of the Camarilla's policies are designed to facilitate the activities of kindred who have long ago lost touch with the mortal world. The Camarilla's position in regard to mortals is mostly pragmatic. In the Dark Ages, the Inquisition and other mortal forces were responsible for the destruction of countless vampires. Now that the mortal population is counted in billions instead of millions, and they have created weapons stronger than the most powerful of vampire powers, they could easily destroy most of vampire society should their existence be revealed. Thus, the Camarilla ensures that their mortal populations are not unduly harmed by vampire activities in order to protect the Masquerade. It's important to note that this does not come out of any goodwill towards humanity. It's purely pragmatic. Still, the kindred are encouraged to blend in with mortals as best as possible and to retain the civility and composure that comes from holding on to one's human characteristics. Almost all Camarilla members are on the path of humanity, with paths of enlightenment being strongly discouraged, and if they are practiced, they're usually only practiced by elders. Something interesting, vampires do not have to follow the path of humanity, although that is the more common one. We'll get into all the paths when we speak about the Sabbat. The Sabbat basically do not even try to pretend to be humans at all. They're totally acceptant of their monstrous nature. But to keep themselves basically as monks and to not fall to their bloodlust, they follow paths of enlightenment. And one of the paths of enlightenment is the path of humanity, but it's strongly discouraged by the Sabbat. Basically, it's seen as something for the Camarilla. Anyways, here's where it gets really interesting. The vast majority of kindred in the Camarilla are no older than maybe a century or two, and thus were not alive when the antediluvians were active powers in the world. Though they may be educated in the story of Cain and the creation of vampires, many regard such tales as myths, having been raised in more scientific times. The leaders of the sect have long made it a strict policy to deny the existence of beings such as the antediluvians, or at the very least state that they all perished centuries ago. Similarly, talk about Gehenna is discouraged, if not straight up punished, if only because of the very concern that such ideas may cause individuals to become paranoid, irrational, and maybe even join a Gehenna cult. While very few kindred would profess to believing in the stories of the end times, many also grow nervous upon seeing signs and portents that seem to appear with frequency in the final nights. The Camarilla's stance is one of the primary reasons the Sabbat claims the Camarilla is in fact controlled by the antediluvians and actively serving their interests. While it is perhaps unlikely that the Camarilla is directly controlled by outside forces, it does appear that even the most knowledgeable and powerful members of the Ivory Tower refuse to make any preparations for even the possibility of Gehenna. Now we get into the politics of the Camarilla. This is probably why the Camarilla makes so many enemies. The Camarilla seems to attract vampires that are interested in politics, and there's so many plans within plans and schemes. It could make your head hurt just thinking about it. It's a sect in which games of prestation are played most openly. Prestation is based on the simple premise that when a vampire receives an important gift or favor, he is completely beholden to the bestower and honor bound to return a favor. When a fledgling is presented officially before the prince and released from the Jus Noctis, Law of the Night. Okay, let me go over this really quick. It's a vampiric term that describes the authority of a sire over his childer. The Jus Noctis dates back to the Long Night, and especially elders respect as tenants. A sire can do with his childer as he please, as long as he does not violate Camarilla law. Furthermore, the Jus Noctis makes the sire responsible for every trespassing on his childer's behalf until he releases it, and presents it officially to the prince of a domain. Some more traditional sires use the Jus Noctis as justification for keeping tabs on their child even after it is released. They usually engage... When a fledgling is presented officially before the prince and released from the Jus Noctis, and allowed as a true member of the domain, they usually engage in their first act of prestation in the process. Although some I just called them clowns, Although some clans, like the Ventrue and Toreador, involve their progeny even earlier in the webs of social boons. As the independent clans, let alone the Sabbat, are in no way obligated to uphold a boon or promise to a Camarilla vampire in a manner that a sect mate would, most kindred are extra cautious when dealing with those outside of the prestation system. Most dealings, if they happen at all, between those groups are the work of elders on both sides. Favors, boons, and pledges of alliance circulate within the Camarilla like currency in the mortal world. As each boon and favor can only be called in on an individual base, there are no set rules and regulations for them. Often, debts are exchanged for other boons or debts, enabling a fluid system in which the lines between enemy and friend can quickly blur. The Harpies are the overseers of this Byzantine system in common-sized domains, while in greater domains a chancellor is in constant requisition to keep track of the nightly shifting web. Many neonates have found themselves in prestation traps by their older peers, who have played the game far longer than they and have much more experience, and usually don't die of infirmity. The sanctity of the prestation system is very important to the Camarilla, especially to the elders who have spent centuries carefully acquiring favors from others. If it suddenly becomes acceptable to welch on one's prestation debt, then suddenly those elders' stockpiles of favors become worthless. Needless to say, the elders in question don't intend to allow that to happen. Those investments in favors are valuable, major resources in the many jihads that the elders play. As such, they have a vested interest in keeping the formality of the prestation system intact. Any offenders are viciously torn down, as the elders use their considerable influence to undermine the rebellious vampire in every area of his interest. Even if the offender manages to survive the social onslaught, his reputation will be tarnished for years, if not decades or centuries. Another kindred will rarely, if ever, socialize with him or offer him boons. As a side effect, priestation also keeps Camarilla society stable. Few kindred wish to lose a boon or debt, and so watch out not to lose their assets. Outright murder against a person that you owe a favor has grave repercussions, usually a painful way to face final death, as it threatens the very fabric of the Camarilla. Also, if an elder owes a favor to a neonate by whatever means, he is still obligated to honor his word. This helps to create the illusion of reliability and civility and of normal human-like interaction that allows the Camarilla to pretend that they are not demonic undead monsters.